Even as the world has been brought to its knees by the global pandemic, it has opened up so many new opportunities to collaborate. We at Team Workouts, the producers of the Jaipur Literature Festival and JLF, are delighted to be able to partner with the University of York in the UK and the York Festival of Ideas. Thank you, Joan Concannon, for bringing to us this wonderful city full of the most incredible monuments and heritage. I do hope our students and viewers take an opportunity to be able to visit the University of York in the UK, and we're delighted to co-present this session with them.
Hello, we at the University of York in the UK are proud and delighted to support this session. This event celebrates the growing partnership between JLF, the University of York, and our own festival, the York Festival of Ideas. Our university and our festival share with the JLF the desire to broaden horizons and to celebrate the world of ideas. In the spirit of virtual events, we invite you to join us virtually from wherever you are in the world. Whether you are a student thinking about studying in the UK, or you simply want to find out more about the university or our beautiful city York, we invite you to join us at york.ac.uk. Thank you.
Today we present Green Energy Investments in the Future. Sumant Sinha and Ajay Mathur in conversation with Mridula Ramesh. At a time when climate battles and energy revolutions map the future of our planet, the quest for clean energy sources that can transform the global landscape is the holy grail of the 21st century. Depleting fossil fuels can be counterbalanced by the conscious use of sustainable alternatives on an international scale, signifying a collective investment in the future. Sumant Sinha, Chairman and Managing Director of ReNew Power, India's leading clean energy company, is the author of Fossil Free: Reimagining Clean Energy in a Carbon-Constrained World, which reimagines the move into a world rooted in sustainable and secure renewable energy. Ajay Mathur is the Director General of the Energy and Resources Institute and a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change. Conversation with the writer and founder of the Sundaram Climate Institute, Mridula Ramesh, they discuss energy, security, climate change mitigation, and the economic benefits of transitioning to clean, green, and affordable energy. Sumant Sinha is the founder and CMD of ReNew Power, India's largest renewable energy company, and the author of Fossil Free. He is a role model for clean energy entrepreneurs and a passionate advocate for clean energy solutions. Ajay Mathur is Director General of the Energy and Resource Institute and a former head of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency and a climate change negotiator. Mridula Ramesh is the author of critically acclaimed The Climate Solution, India's Climate Change Crisis, and What We Can Do About It. She is the co-founder of the Sundaram Climate Institute, and she is the executive director of Sundaram Textiles and lives and experiments in Madurai in a net zero waste house. Please do remember to comment by typing it into the comment section below. Ladies and gentlemen, green energy investments in the future. Sumant Sinha and Ajay Mathur in conversation with Mridula Ramesh.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm super excited to be here with my fellow panelists, Sumant Sinha and Ajay Mathur. This is a subject that's really close to my heart. If there is one country in the world that really needed to care about the climate change crisis, it's India. And that's what I've really gone through in my first book. That's what motivated me to get on this journey. We're warm, we have a large population that is dependent on farming, and we don't have as much money as we would like to make the changes that make us more resilient in this warming climate. Climate change, as many of you will understand, is no longer a problem of the future. It is the problem of the here and now. In just 2020 alone, India faced a bill of $25 billion, as per one estimate, from damages from floods and landslides. To blame it all on climate change is inaccurate, but climate change, which brings intense rainfall in its wake, definitely played a role. The time to act on climate change was yesterday. And no decade is more crucial than the next decade in transitioning to a more secure future. Because fossil fuels and the greenhouse gas emissions lies at the heart of what is driving this current crisis. It's not orbital changes, it's not the oceans, it is fossil fuels, which anyone who has spent a lifetime studying this would tell you. That, we've all of us have heard about the carbon budget, that thing that is so shrinking so fast that if we continue the way we are, we have literally no chance of staying within 2 degrees, let alone 1.5 degrees in the coming century. And so now I'm just going to say one point which is sort of controversial. Even India, which doesn't play that major a role like, say, China or some other countries in adding to greenhouse gas emissions, still has, I believe we really need to transition to renewables, to greener energy for another reason entirely: water, right? The water footprint and the co-benefits that our panelists are really going to talk about really drives the story for transition to green energy. And that's something I've really spent a lot of time in my second book, which is on water, which is coming up. So with that, I'm really, really excited because we couldn't have asked for two better people to walk us through this. Someone who's put his money literally where his mouth is, and that's Sumant Sinha, who's basically shaped his career around helping India and the world transition to a greener future. So Sumant, over to you. Coal and fossil fuels really still hold the lion's share of India's energy mix. And although of late, solar and other renewable energy has been adding in capacity, what are some of the ways we can reduce our dependence on coal and other fossil fuels?
Yeah, thank you, Mridula, and I'd like to thank the JLF for having me on the show. I think it's a very important topic, and therefore I'm very glad that JLF has chosen to showcase or at least have a discussion on this very, very important issue for all of us. Just to, Mridula, put a couple of points for you in context. You talked about the carbon budget. We have a scant 15 years before India runs out of whatever budget we have before we cross the 2 degrees centigrade temperature change irrevocably. And unfortunately, the track that we're on, if you add up all the Paris Climate Accord commitments, is putting us on a 3.5 degree temperature change by the end of the year, by the end of the century. And so therefore, we're just simply not doing enough. Now, and I'll let Mr. Mathur talk about some of these in more detail because he's really the expert on some of these areas. But to answer the question more specifically that you asked me about coal and fossil fuels in general, again, just to put a little bit of context, energy accounts for 3/4 of carbon emissions. And within energy, electricity accounts for 1/4 of that 3/4. Within that electricity bucket, renewables today accounts for only 10%. So we are actually a very, very small solution at this point in time to the overall carbon emissions problem, right? We need to become many, many, many times bigger. In fact, if I can just sort of structure the conversation, we need to, first of all, increase the percentage of renewables in the electricity budget, in the electricity mix from 10% up to 50, 60, and eventually 100%. And I'm sure we'll talk about how that can be done. And the second thing that we need to do is we need to increase the share of electricity in the overall energy mix. And both of those need to happen for us to be able to start making significant dents on this whole issue of carbon emissions. And unless we do that, and we do that, as you said, in a real hurry of the next literally 10 to 15 years, we're actually going to miss the boat on climate change altogether. Now, while India is not the country that has contributed to the bulk of the problem, the reality is that we are the third largest carbon emitter at this point in time in the world after China and the US. And the reality also is that, all countries are in the same boat. We can't say that, we can shut our borders or we can sort of stop worrying about climate change if we don't emit. The reality is, whether we like it or not, it's a single world and we'll be impacted one way or the other. So all countries have to do the maximum that we can do. And so therefore, India also needs to do the most that it can do on reducing carbon emissions. And we'll talk. I'm sure we'll talk about it. But the government certainly is doing the bit and moving forward on renewable energy and so on. But the reality is that today, coal-based power generation accounts for almost 2/3 or more of the entire electricity generation in the country, and that is unsustainable. That has to come down. And beyond that, transportation, which accounts for another quarter of this overall energy consumption, is almost entirely driven by fossil fuels. And so that whole thing has to change as well. So the task ahead of us is very steep. We don't have time. The solutions need to be, thought through very quickly and implemented very fast. So we all need to work together on that effect.
Ajay, I'm going to come over to you. I think, diversity is really what shapes this debate. And there are so many different voices with different preferences in the room. Globally, the pace in the last few years, the pace of adoption of renewables has really shot up. But what are some of the forces that can really, add muscle to these forces that are pushing for renewable adoption?
Mridula, a big question. But before I start again, let me add my words to your words and those of Sumant in thanking the JLF for having us and for considering this an important enough issue to be discussed. Mridula, I think the most important issue is the economic issue. The prices of renewable energy have dramatically come down. Today, a kilowatt hour, a unit of electricity from solar costs ₹1.99, less than 2 rupees a unit. Did we ever imagine it? I didn't. The limitation today is that this is available only when the sun is shining. But thanks to Sumant, possibly next year, I think, or the year after that, he has promised to provide us round-the-clock renewable electricity at prices that are competitive with that of electricity from coal. Only 5 years ago, when the Paris meeting happened, was 5.5 years ago, solar electricity was costing 18 rupees a unit. 18 rupees to 2 rupees is one large fall. To me, this is the single largest driver. As both of you have mentioned, we are a country where the electricity demand is still increasing, and unfortunately, the willingness to pay, the ability of pay of Indian users is limited. And consequently, anything that produces cheaper electricity would be a preferential source. So tomorrow or day after, when solar plus storage provides the cheapest electricity in the market, you can well imagine that there is no rationale at all for investing in higher cost fossil fuels. That's the first part. But let me also note that obviously this is environmentally superior. We are talking of a zero carbon. We are talking of one in which there are no air pollution. In Delhi, 3 years ago, a very large part of the air pollution was because of the emissions from a power station which are within Delhi. It's closed, and suddenly you notice the difference in air quality. Similarly on CO2. But the third issue that I'd also like you to note, and this is something that led India to develop the world's first Ministry of Renewable Energy, is our financial imports of energy. Today, in excess of 30 billion, that's with a B, not an M, $30 billion worth of imports, dollars, not rupees, of imports of energy happen every year. And you can imagine that this would break any government's back. A very large part of the renewable actions in this country, and this predates the climate debate, have occurred because of the need to see how we can avoid those import bills. They lead to large macroeconomic problems. So I would suggest it's the economic, the environmental, and the financial benefits which are driving renewables today and will continue to drive them as the prime dog in the years to come.
Absolutely, Ma. Ajay, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, in our company, that is Sundaram Textiles, we have a large share of windmills, and we're looking very actively at solar also. And we do that some part because of the environmental benefit, but it's also much cheaper. I mean, it's a no-brainer for most people looking at it to go for renewables now. The one thing of environmental, and I completely echo everything that you say, and one thing that's underappreciated is, today everybody's aware of the water crisis also. And renewables have a far smaller impact on our scarce water resources than fossil fuel plants have. So that's added benefit to transitioning to a greener future. It's bluer too. So Sumant, over to you. I'm sure you would like to be growing as 10 times as fast as you are today, right? And there are definitely roadblocks in transitioning to a greener future. Can you walk us through what some of those are, which will help India become environmentally secure, green secure, and financially secure?
Yeah, sure, Mridula. So, the interesting thing is that India's power demand today is the third largest in the world after China and the US. We consume 1.4 trillion units of power every year. We are growing at about 5 to 6% every year. So over the next 12 years, we will actually double the entire amount of power that we consume. The question is, where is this extra power generation going to come from? And this is where the news is somewhat good, because as Dr. Mathur said, renewables is so much cheaper. Renewables will become the default option for any new capacity addition that has to happen in the future, right? And so therefore, as we look at the next 1.4 trillion units, the government has appropriately set a target of setting up 450,000 megawatts of renewable energy capacity in the next 10 years, up from the 90,000 right now. But to get to your question, this requires us to set up 360,000 megawatts of new renewable energy capacity in the next 10 years, which is equal to India's entire power sector installed capacity set up from the dawn of our history, okay, till now. We're being asked to do that in 10 years only in renewable energy. So that tells you how daunting the challenge really is, right? And the interesting thing is that even if we achieve this target, and I'll talk a little bit about what the issues are, even if we achieve this target, it will still not meet our entire power demand growth. So the balance of power is going to have to come from somewhere. And unfortunately, that is going to come from coal, because there is no other source that is cheap and effective and can be easily ramped up. So we will therefore continue to have more coal consumption in India over the next 10 to 15 years, right? Before we catch up on renewable capacity addition, and then that starts replacing coal-based capacity. Now the question is, why can't we go faster than 450,000 megawatts? So there are several issues. And the biggest issue among those things is that the road to India's climate change future lies not in renewable energy, but lies in the distribution utilities of India. Okay, and that's a bit of an odd thing to say, but the reality is that unless the distribution sector in India is reformed, we can't keep selling power to them because they don't pay us on time. And if they don't pay us on time, how on earth do we raise capital and set up all of this capacity? So the first thing that we need to do to address our climate change problem is to reform the distribution utilities. Okay, now that sounds very counterintuitive, but unfortunately, that is the reality within which we're operating right now. Okay, so that's point number one. The second issue is this physical challenge of constructing all of this capacity on the ground. Now, for that, we require to source land. We need to build transmission connectivity. We need to hire people, train them, run all these assets, procure the equipment. Now, the reality is all of that can be done, because the more you make the sector attractive, the more people will come in, and the more that you'll have hands on the deck trying to do all of these things. So to me, that's an addressable problem. It's not easy, but it's addressable. But what we do require is we need policy making, not just at the central level, where it is absolutely heading in the right direction, but at the state level. And the states need to be on board. And that is really where the rubber really in some ways meets the road. And states therefore have to be very, very conducive towards addition of renewable energy capacity. They have to look at their own approval systems and issues, and really improve the ease of doing business, which unfortunately at some level, you still have to struggle with a lot of these issues. The last thing is the issue of capital, right? And capital, again, as I said, to me is, as long as returns are reasonable and attractive and predictable, your capital is going to come in. Okay. The last thing is the point that, sorry, I said the last thing twice, but is the point that Dr. Mathur made, which is around the issue of intermittency management. But again, there I'm pretty sure that with the reduction in costs, new storage technologies coming in, solutions can be found. Okay, so I think that technology solutions are available, capital is available, there are enough people to lend their shoulder to finding, to actually setting up this capacity. But we need good policies, predictable, transparent, and long term. And we need reforms of distribution utilities for us to be able to meet these targets.
No, thank you, Sumant. I was smiling so much because our windmills tend to get turned off during peak generation statement. So I feel your pain. No, I think it's a point well said. I think, when we look at it the way you structured it, reforms need to come in, and then, capital will flow in, technology will follow. Those are not really the bottlenecks. Money is not the bottleneck. Technology is not the bottleneck. Reforms are, and especially state reforms. And I think all of us feel your pain, and we've seen the difficulty in reforms, and that's really something we need to see how to do. And that brings me to you, Ajay, again. One way to sort of incentivize reforms is to look at all the multiple benefits that going green can become. It's not just burnishing India's climate change reputation, and it is a good reputation. We are very responsible that way. But what else can we do? Especially, how can we talk about how can we actually motivate our leaders to think of this as a good thing to do for their voters, for India in general?
Mridula, one of the things that the economic lockdown has brought out to all of us policy wonks is the importance of job creation. At the end of the day, this is what is most important to any leader at any level. And therefore, the point that both the generation of renewables, but more importantly, the use of renewables produces more jobs is a message that needs to be disseminated to the point where it becomes internalized. For example, if I set up a solar generating unit or a wind generating unit in a rural area, that provides me the opportunity to build rural cold storages. Just 1/3 of the cold storages we have in this country are in rural areas. 2/3 are in peri-urban areas. And why? Because there is no electricity and you have to run it on a diesel genset. That's amazingly expensive. But with inexpensive renewable energy now available, it is now possible to have rural cold storages. Now imagine the job chain. Generation as well as use. You are creating jobs which did not occur yesterday. You're creating jobs in areas where there is a problem. This is the kind of story that makes renewables very attractive to decision makers. So therefore, the way they look at it is, this is a social investment. I noticed the huge change that occurred when we started providing LPG in rural areas instead of depending on people to use biomass, which produce a huge amount of environmental hazards, especially within the kitchen. And the petroleum minister, not once, but many times had said, we do this because it's a social investment. I think that is a language that clicks. The last point also, I think, is that we need to make the air quality benefit issue a lot more transparent. I gave the example of Delhi, but this will occur in any city across the country where, because we do have power stations which are close by, moving to renewables makes a cleaner environment for each one of us to live in. This is eminently politically viable. So to me, the key issues that we need to focus on are job creation and protecting the local environment. Those are reasons why politicians will like the movement, or have liked wherever there has been success, the movement towards renewables.
No, I think it's a point very well taken, Ajay. I know we've spent a lot of time talking about solar. I mean, one of the things that excites me is in the renewable energy mix is actually biogas as well. Especially biogas that's made from wet waste in municipal cities. I mean, one of my climate change investments does precisely that. They make biogas from food waste of our cities, and that's really exciting. And if we can explore that ecosystem, I think the waste ecosystem, I think the numbers in my book were around upwards of 600,000 jobs. And I think if Sumant, the job potential in just maintaining those solar panels in our country, I mean, they must go well into the thousands, if not the hundreds of thousands, right?
So, Mridula, one of the things that you can also, we as a community can also push is the fact that this forces us as a country to upskill people. Because you can't have unskilled people managing either solar pumps or managing solar cold storages or biogas, which is used in a variety of applications, particularly for heating in cottage industries. This forces us to invest in decentralized skill development.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're coming up to the end. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. What really energizes you? What really makes you excited about this transition, and what keeps you up at night? This is to each of you. So, Sumant, shall we start with you?
Okay, sure. What excites me is the fact that even though we've made so much progress on renewable energy right now, to me, we've barely scratched the surface. Because of the numbers that I was talking about earlier, we have a long way to go. And eventually, if you think about it, the entire power sector has to be, the entire coal sector, the whole fossil sector in energy has to eventually be replaced by clean energy sources. And when you start looking at the kind of scale of investments required, and again, to give you some numbers at a global level, estimates are that, today we have about 6,000 gigawatts of power generating capacity globally, okay? We need to set up over the next 20 to 30 years, if you want to eventually get to net zero globally by, let's say, 2050 or 2060, we have to set up almost 7 to 8 times of that capacity in renewable energy, okay? If we want to also electrify some of the other energy sectors like mobility and so on. So this is a challenge which of life we have never seen in our history, of mankind, and therefore it's going to be enormous. It's going to lead to humongous opportunities on technology, on the investment side, on transmission, on how it's going to lead to transformations in how people consume power, the job creation potential. All of these are going to be enormous. So that really, therefore, is very exciting, because within this, a number of new business models will emerge. And how India can take advantage of this new industry is going to be, I think, very exciting to look out for and watch out for. And of course, how we as individual companies can take advantage for all of us will be challenging. What keeps me awake at night is the issue of policy making. And the reason I say that is because technology is moving so rapidly that by the time you make a policy decision, things have changed. And ultimately, you can't have investments unless you give 25-year visibility on, let's say, PPAs and so on, right? And then within 2 or 3 years, things have totally changed. And the decisions that you may have made 2 or 3 years ago could be again redundant or may have to be changed. So policymakers have to be very agile mentally and very flexible about changing their points of view and redoing policies and so on, but at the same time protecting legacy investments. So I think that is going to be a big challenge to my mind, and how that plays out ultimately is a cause and a source of worry for us, because we are actually putting hard dollars to work or hard rupees to work, which ultimately have to generate returns over a longish period of time. And so therefore, we have to make sure that there's stability as much as possible within a fast-changing technology environment.
Thank you, Sumant. I think policy keeps us all up. Ajay, over to you.
Mridula, we are at the JLF, and I am wondering, when will we start seeing literary masterpieces coming out which have the climate change world as a backdrop. Dickens wrote about the Industrial Revolution. I mean, that formed the backdrop of the vast oeuvre that he produced. The Impressionists captured that scene. My own feeling is that the kinds of moral, behavioral issues that come in, the critique of capitalism that comes in, is in no way less revolutionary than that was produced by the Industrial Revolution. It completely changes society. So one of the things that I actually wonder is the kind of world that 10 years from now people will start seeing us move into. So things that keep me up at night, I mean, yes, Sumant is absolutely right. The policy agenda obviously keeps me up at night. But the other issue that keeps me up at night is, what does this mean for you and me in our lives day after tomorrow? Think of this. If the marginal cost of renewable electricity is very near zero, Sumant will attest to this far better than I can, what does this mean for how we envision energy in our lives? We, for example, switch off lights when we go from one room to the other. Is that then gone? I somehow don't think so. But I think we need to have a broader set of thinking coming in. What would happen as far as investments are concerned in, for example, how do you go to the supermarket to buy groceries? Where does the energy and the sociology of this mix? So the life of tomorrow would be very different. And I often wonder whether we are walking blindfolded.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, one of you is the policy wonk and the other is the provider. I'll wear my hat of the user. Okay. And I'll say one of the things that keeps me really excited is how really good renewable energy is. I mean, as a person, as an individual, having biogas at home saves us about a cylinder a month, right?
Yeah.
So it's really exciting. It's useful. It's, as long as you make it convenient, which is something I think all of us forget about when putting together a solution, it really works. I'm not sure I would be profitable without renewable energy. Okay, and this is textiles. It's low margin, boring industry.
Correct.
That's key to our profitability, right? And we are the largest employer of women outside agriculture as an industry. So there you go. I mean, I think to me that makes me very excited. And what makes me scared? I have 2 kids, and I mean, I didn't put half of my fears in my first book on climate change. And a friend said, "Why are you scaring me so much?" Because when you look at India's vulnerability to a warming climate, and you see things like the floods we've seen in the last year, there's no part that's spared, right? And if you don't make the connection, and I think Sumant said it really, the bottleneck is really policy. And if we don't make the connection to jobs and local benefits to making the right policy and timely policy, I think is what you said, policy keeping up with the technology. It's really frightening, what the world we are stepping into. So with that, I mean, I'd like you to close with what are some of your thoughts in what you'd like people to understand? Because at the end of the day, we have a generalist audience. What is the one thing you would like them to take away from our conversation?
From my side, Mridula, to go first, is the fact that there is a level of urgency that I don't yet think most people appreciate. We just don't have enough time. And I think that unless this issue is internalized by everybody, and unless people start writing about it, talking about it, discussing it, in some ways putting pressure on the government of whichever country they happen to be in, more pressure, I don't think we'll get to the right solutions in the right time period. I mean, we're just not heading in that direction right now. And despite all of the evidence and the science being very clear, we are still just not doing enough. Now, why are we not doing enough? Because clearly a large percentage of people in one of the largest countries in the world, just does not believe that climate change is a big issue. Right? And so therefore, there's always some stop and start policy that keeps happening. And therefore, everybody else starts wondering as well, is this really real or not? But the reality is it is real. And we don't have enough time. And therefore, all of us in civil society, for the reasons that you mentioned primarily, for our children, we do not have time to save them and to give them and bequeath to them a better planet. And therefore, we all must do whatever we absolutely can. Renewable energy is one part of the solution. But ultimately, we have to all change our own respective behaviors and get society around us to change behaviors as well. So I think it has to be a much broader based movement with a much higher sense of urgency than we have right now. And some of us, of course, are involved day to day in this for business reasons, but there's also a strong sense of purpose behind what we're doing. And I think that sense of purpose really has to become much more broad-based across civil society on this issue.
Mridula, number one, I completely echo what Sumant said. And let me provide the other part, the flip side of the coin. And you personally, as both a producer of renewable energy and as a user, that is the part that I would like to emphasize. I think each one of us needs to look into our own lives and see how is it that we can move towards a cleaner future. For example, by investing in an electric vehicle, whether a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler, can I make, obviously, my life better, but the lives of the planet better? By investing in a rural cold storage, can we make the incomes of farmers better apart from this owner making more money? It is these kinds of decisions that I think ultimately matter, because unless we create demand, unless you and I start demanding for cleaner energy, then Sumant as a producer can produce, but that must be used. At the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, when we started the star labeling program for appliances, this was the motivating factor, that it provides you and I as consumers with a tool to say, I am going to buy something which is more energy efficient. And that, as we have seen over the years, has actually changed the market. The average air conditioner that is sold today is roughly 50% more efficient than the air conditioner that was sold in 2000. I see no reason why a consumer-driven movement cannot make the change. I do believe that it is important for us to start providing options for you and I on cleaner, greener options as opposed to fossil fuel-based dirtier options.
Absolutely, Ajay. And I think one of the points you said is, the demand for Sumant's energy, but I would also say paying for the energy is equally important. So, there is a question on the individual's role in getting it. And because we're running out of time, I'll sort of try to wrap it up, try to wrap up the session. I think at the heart of it, when I hear what both of you are saying, the individual and the community lies at the forefront of all these changes, because at the end of the day, you are the person who needs to persuade your leaders to make the policies that will enable the money to come in to power the enormous need. I mean, I think the numbers, Sumant, that you said, I think we have to provide multiple times of the capacity that we've done in our entire history in a short period of time of 10 years. We haven't used words like climate inertia. The fact that once those greenhouse gases are up there in the atmosphere, they tend to stay often for hundreds of years, continuing the warming trend. So it is up to every individual in a differing voice across the world to really ask for those policies, to ask for the greener energy, and for policymakers like Ajay to sort of shape the policies to bring the green power, so green and blue, power solutions to the population. I think we need to vote for those. I think there are elections coming up in several of India's states, and we need to convince our leaders that it's the right thing to do to incentivize the energy. And thank you for the this great opportunity for a wonderful panel. If I was to summarize, I think we have a daunting task. Sumant, you're going to lead us into it. I think it's a great book. I would recommend you read it. Ajay, I think you are stepping into the shoes as the Director General of the International Solar Alliance. Helping the world and helping India lead the world into a greener, future. And thank you again, JLF, for this, for giving a space for this discussion and highlighting how important, how daunting, but how hopeful a future that we can create, each and every one of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, JLF. Thanks, Sumant.
Thank you, Sumant Sinha, Ajay Mathur, Mridula Ramesh. That was absolutely brilliant. I'm looking forward, Mridula, to come to see your zero waste energy house. This is really the future. We all know that 2050 is the most important date for all of us. Let's work together collectively to be able to get to that point. We'd like to thank Diageo, our celebration partner, and all of you for logging on. Do remember to watch episodes at the Darbar Hall as well. And of course, visit the Amazon bookstore and buy books and the Earth Fables craft store. Thank you all for supporting us at Teamwork Arts. Every bit that you give us and contribute will help us allow people from across the world to come together to listen to knowledge and information. Please tweet using hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2021, and our handle is @Jaipur Lit Fest. The festival is protected by Dettol. Stay safe.